glad I got that little jump quite right. I sometimes do my own stunts, but it would have been really embarrassing if I'd fallen over just on my face right then, right? How you going? G'day. Can you all tune into my slightly weird Swedish-Australian accent? Yeah, a few nods, fantastic, good stuff. Good, it's been a good morning, and I'm glad I got to get reminded about the importance of cash flow and the importance of having some cash flow straight up front. These are things that we need to remind ourselves of as SME owners and leaders all of the time. I've also had the privilege of sitting down towards the back as I've been listening to some of these insights, observing a number of you, not necessarily in the stalkerish way, although specifically what I have been watching are your wrists, which does sound somewhat awkward and stalkerish. And what I've been observing is the fact that a number of you insist on wearing these high-tech devices. In fact, just by a show of hands, a bit of social research here in the morning, who is wearing an analog watch out of the audience today? Okay, fantastic. It's like 40% of the audience. Who's not going to raise their hands no matter what I ask for the remainder of the conversation? All right, that is a trick question. I mean, my question, though, is in an era where we have digital time all around us, digital time that's accurate, precise, convenient, and with us no matter where we go and no matter what time zone that we're in, and that updates automatically, digital time that we then send our analog watches by to make sure that these devices are accurate. Why on earth do we still wear analog watches? And that is not a rhetorical question. Why is that? Yes? Yes, of course, yes. For me, it's also a little bit of man bling. I'm glad we're brothers in arms. Okay, any other reasons we wear analog watches? Yes? Okay, so it's a nice visual representation of the kind of linear flow of time, potentially. Yes. Did anyone get given your watch, perhaps by a loved one? Yeah, fantastic. So it has some sentimental value. Yeah, or you just have to wear it, right? You know, these are the two options usually. Now, my primary argument here as a futurist might be a little bit cynical, might be a little bit ironic in some way, shape, or form. But what I'm going to talk to you about is that the digital future that we've heard a little bit about here this morning increasingly is connecting with the customer or the consumer's increasingly digitized, rational minds that crave speed, convenience, immediacy, and price transparency. But as human beings, we're still fundamentally emotional and analog at heart. And as small business owners, the way for you to stand out and to be successful in the future is to provide informational value via digital channels, but still connect heart to heart, belly to belly, face to face. To win the hearts and the minds of tomorrow's customers, this is something that you must do as an SME owner. Now, this was the coolest watch going around back in the early 1980s in Sweden when I grew up in Stockholm. And I begged and pleaded with my parents that this should be the watch that they gave me as a sign of the coming of age as I entered year one in the German school in Stockholm, where they sent me to be logical and rational. My parents, though, are real traditionalists. They love the analog. They love tradition. And of course, they bought me a pictogram, an analog watch that I had to wear to school to learn the ways of old. Now, I have a little bit of a love-hate relationship with our digital future. On the one hand, in the digital future offers us huge opportunities to connect globally, to start small businesses that connect globally even though they started locally, to break down international boundaries and to connect us intergenerationally, cross-religiously, and multiculturally. It also enables this little hero, little Max Harpham, and I know Emma Harpham, you're here for the live stream from Hornsby, Sydney today. Max Harpham is the 9-year-old son of my colleague in my research think tank, Emma Harpham, and her husband, Aaron Harpham. He's a really cool kid. And this really cool kid that's into his skateboarding, his extreme sports, his rally driving, and also, profoundly for me as a football-loving Swede, also just got voted the Player of the Year for the Normanhurst Eagles under-9s. The really cool thing about this kid that competes on par with the other 9-year-olds in Normanhurst and around Hornsby on the North Shore of Sydney is that little Max Harpham was born profoundly deaf. But because of a great Australian innovation in technology, of which he has two, one behind each ear, operated into his little brain, behind each ear, this digitally amplifies sound where there was no sound before. For little Max Harpham, a freight train could go past his little back without him hearing anything whatsoever. And the really cool thing is that once a year, during the Australian Swimming Carnival, he's the only kid that can properly hear underwater. Now this, as a futurist and as a human being, gives me sort of digital goosebumps, right? Because it enables Max to receive the intergenerational wisdom from his parents, to connect with the kids around him, and to not just lip read. Now, 100 years ago, the situation would have been entirely different. For any fans of Al Capone and Boardwalk Empire, you'll know that Al Capone's son, his oldest son, was born profoundly deaf, I should say. Now, back then, you were put in the dumb bin. But today's digital technology enables kids like Max to compete on par and to have all the same possibilities and to be a great little football goal scorer. So this is pretty cool. But the digital world also gives me some misgivings, because the digital world can be extremely disruptive if you, as an SME owner, are not adaptive. The important thing about all this digital disruption that we keep hearing about is that digital disruption is a form of change. And change doesn't really care whether you like it, I like it, or my mother likes it or not. It's going to happen without our permission at an increasing rate of change and speed. So change is something we need to get very, very comfortable with as business owners. And let me tell you why I have this little misgiving. Let me tell you about someone who's very close to my heart at the center of this analog watch in Stockholm, Sweden. Now, Sweden's not famous for making great analog watches, I should say. That's Switzerland, not Sweden. They export great tennis players these days, like Roger Federer. These days, Sweden sucks. We recently had to qualify against Denmark, the New Zealand of Scandinavian tennis, to retain our position, not in the elite division, but Division 1 of the Davis Cup tennis. Switzerland also produces great cheeses and great chocolates. Sweden sucks at exporting those. Really, the only thing that props up our national economy is IKEA. The greatest contribution to the high Aussie divorce rate and contribution to the adoption of yoga for stiff Australian men. Having to put things together without an annual Allen key and an instruction manual. So whoever made this provenance marketing ad for Swiss analog watches, Tissot watches, proudly Swiss since 1853, over a map of Sweden, should have been fired. Never do this in your marketing. This would be like the equivalent of marketing Swarovski Austrian crystals over a map of Lithgow, Australia. Yeah, it just doesn't work, right? Take care about your geography when you market your businesses. Let me take you back to the days of nearly Al Capone, 100 years in history, to showcase how business has changed from back in the day. Because this was the urban vista in Stockholm, Sweden, that greeted a man by the name of Georg Johansson, or the son of Johan, which sounds very Viking-esque. As he moved from the family farm as the second son, he had no inheritance right to the family property, but he had to go and explore his own commercial opportunities in this black and white vista in Stockholm. Things were a little bit simpler in those days. Things were sort of black or white. In fact, people only wore black or white back then. And Georg Sorman, later to be, realized that he wanted to bring a bit of flair after completing a retail apprenticeship to the way that the Swedish gentlemen of the day dressed. Now, this was a time when the Swedish men were on the verge of international sophistication, having just hosted in the 1912 Stockholm Swedish Summer Olympics. His business was always belly to belly, heart to heart, face to face, often enjoying a glass of red wine with his clients. Now, this was a time before YouTube, before selfies, when looking into a technological device like a camera was still very much of a novelty. And in a nod to his family heritage, Georg Johansson changed his surname from the son of Johan to the man from the southern farm, or in Swedish, Georg Sorman. Georg Sorman is my great-grandfather, and as you can tell, he must have been a bit of a futurist already back in the day, because he's got a great haircut and a fantastic little pocket square. For many years, the business did well through traditional marketing, through traditional ways of connecting with the hearts and the minds of yesteryear's customers, through advertisements via traditional media like this. And I should just apologize to the ladies in the audience here today to say that this was very much pre-Swedish feminism or very Mad Men style advertising. For my mother, Birgitta, who now runs this shop, the business environment looks very, very different. And she looks incredibly young for being 106. We moisturize in Sweden, as you can tell. And as you can tell, she still folds my clothes and dresses me every morning. For my mum, she carries the heritage and the expectations of 3 generations on her shoulders, trying to get this business to its centenary. And she's only 18 months away, nearly 2 years away from that centenary. But she doesn't know whether it's going to make it. Why? Because consumer and customer behavior has digitized, mobilized, and effectively changed. Why? Well, the customer now walks into the store, they hang out with mum and her little tailor, Hassan, our grumpy tailor, who's fantastic, though, at giving advice. They get free intellectual property and their measurements given to them. They'll jot them down via pen or paper if they still remember handwriting, or alternatively on their smart devices. They'll scan a couple of barcodes on the way through quite blatantly in the face of my mother's sight, and then they'll say, yeah, we'll think about it. Then they exit the store to the sound of a very, very lonely little archaic bell, go out to the street, around the corner, and then they'll order the item on eBay or amazon.com/fashion. This digital disruption is incredibly digitally disruptive for my mum. Why? Because she has not adapted with the times. Her business model is fundamentally well adapted for a world that no longer exists. And in our management consulting sessions, Mum likes to call them family dinners. I mean, how annoying must it be, right, to have a futurist as your son, right? She goes, you should have stayed with the law in a safe distance away from the family business. Yeah, now I go in and prod stuff and change things and ask the question, why do we do it like this? My mum fundamentally doesn't like change. And in our management consulting sessions, I ask her why. And she goes, Anders, do you remember the days of puberty? Has anyone been through puberty? I mean, change can be extremely awkward, right? Right? Has anyone ever thought about changing a partner? And not necessarily physically exchanging them, but selling them on the concept of change and why you must do things differently as a couple. How easy is that conversation? How easy is it to sell change and a different vision for the future? This can be incredibly difficult at times, right? And for my mother, the essential personality identity conflict is where she should position her business, her brand, on this continuum between, on the one hand, tradition, face-to-face, heart-to-heart, and the connectivity of belly-to-belly, the things she knows. Or, alternatively, the digital interface-to-interface virtual cyber reality that she doesn't quite grasp. When she sends me text messages, they're all in capital, and she has to punch them in with her little finger like this, even though I've taught it to use her thumbs. Her thumbs just don't match up with the touchpad. huge opportunity, right? Designing digital devices for people who may not be able to feel touch devices on a phone that's this small. Huge opportunity if you're a business owner for the future, catering digital devices for baby boomers. My mission, though, as a futurist, is to kind of go hashtag no baby boomer left behind. Because it's incredibly important that we don't create a digital divide, but rather a digital provide, and that's what I'm here to talk about today. Let me just give you the terms of reference here for just a moment. The analog world is the world of the face-to-face. The digital world is interface to interface. One is about the old school, one is about the new school. One is about the offline, the other one about the online. One is about the personal touch in business. The other one is about the quick digital connect. One is about 9 to 5 opening hours. The other one is about 24/7, 365 opening hours. One is about word of mouth recommendations. The other one is about word of mouth recommendations either for or against your brand. One is about the high touch. The other one is about the high tech. And one is about winning hearts. The other one is about winning minds. And while my mum in her store might win some hearts, the digital minds are not won yet. But we'll show some things that are relevant for small business that she's starting to implement to get out of the woods. First idea here today, the idea that everything that can be digitized eventually will be digitized, or digital disruption. Who are the statisticians in the room who love numbers? Anybody? One person, fantastic. We all need to see you for advice, right? These slides are just for the economics, easy to say. What's the term in English? Easy to say. Economists, econometrics, I was going to say. Okay, the economists. Thank you very much. Clearly, the rest of the presentation is going to be in Swedish or German or one of the other languages. All right, digital disruption. Have a look at some stats here for just a moment. Some of you might remember the yellow pages, this increasingly thin circulation, increasingly digitized circulation. Here is its circulation over the last decade or so. The long-term trend in newspaper advertising revenue looked pretty healthy from the 1950s onwards, staggering numbers until patent expiry happened. That decline in print advertising just over the last decade or so equals negative economic growth of 42.9%. So where are you spending your advertising or your editorial dollars? Think about the media that you consume. Well, in 2000, only a small portion were digital downloads, 93% CDs. 2005, still only 9% digital downloads, 85% CDs. And in 2010, 47% digital downloads, and these were only the legal ones. So what we're really competing with here as SME owners and leaders is the doubling of computing power every 18 to 24 months, smashing more analog linear growth to pieces. The question is, how quickly are you upgrading the way you think about and market your business? And of course, social, digital media are growing in compliance with the law of more, i.e. doubling every 18 to 24 months, even though Facebook has slightly slowed down in the last few quarters as it's been maturing. And in 2011, we reached a global tipping point with more smartphones and tablets shipping globally than PCs and notebooks, meaning increasingly your customers are mobilizing around the world, expecting real-time information about your business on the go, or even just outside of your office. This means that digital retail, of course, is on the rise, enjoying nice, healthy, compounded annual growth rates into the future. And increasingly, of course, that is available to us as well via our mobile devices, meaning that increasingly customers are now taking matters into their own hands and spending their cash outside of my mum's little shop in Sweden. Not that I'm passive aggressive. This, of course, means in conclusion that there's a steady shift from the analog to the digital, and successful business owners in the future need to be mindful of how you transition and where you're spending your marketing dollars as a result. Now, this is not just something that's going to happen in retail trade necessarily. It will happen for any industry. Deloitte Digital recently released a report called The Short Fuse Big Bang Theory of Digital Disruption. On the y-axis, what you have is the length of the fuse until digital disruption hits your particular industry. Either short, 0 to 2 years, or rather longer, from 3 to 5 years. And on the y-axis, what you have is the size of the impact, either contained or rather large at the top. We all know where my mum sits. Short fuse, big impact. Where is your industry? Short fuse, big bang, long fuse, small bang. And where is the industry that you're selling to? Every industry will be impacted by this digital disruption, not just now, but into the foreseeable future. And when I look to the future, what really worries me is the fact that research now shows that 2 to 5-year-olds in the Western world, more of them today know how to play Angry Birds on their iPhones than actually know how to tie their shoelaces. Any parents of 2 to 5-year-olds in the room? Okay, fantastic. This is not the parenting therapeutic session. I wish you all the best for the future. But you know that these guys were truly born digital. For them, a magazine on the floor is simply an iPad that doesn't work. But these digital natives speak technology without an accent, unlike some of the digital immigrants like my mum who speak it with a heavy accent. Yeah, for them this stuff is native and they'll do business very, very differently in the future. If you were born after 1994, you've never known a world without the internet. If you thought Gen Y was slightly weird and eccentric, guilty as charged, how weird is the next generation going to be? Or the one after that? How long are you intending on staying in business and how are you going to connect with that next generation as a result? This also means that they're spending and thinking about money in new ways. Cash used to be king, right? No longer in the future is that necessarily the case. Yeah? Already kids are spending your analog cash buying virtual or cyber goods online. Great investment, right? Take real money and spending it on something that only exists in virtual reality. But for these kids, there's going to be no foreseeable difference between offline or online. Only us that grew up with the ding, 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 sound of the 56K modem are the two different places. And the question is whether your business model combines the best of the analog and the digital together. The great American philosopher George Costanza from Seinfeld once said, for everything important in life, it needs to have a package, a physical package. For your cash, there's your wallet. But for kids tomorrow, they're not going to have a physical wallet. They'll have a Google wallet that through near-frequency communications is going to transact your dollars for them. In fact, just to showcase that, I did bring a little device. To just showcase, and of course we could do this on a mobile phone as well via Square technology, but having heard the cash flow conversation just before, I brought one of these along because I think it's really important for SMEs to always be transacting, always be sending invoices. And if I wasn't so Swedish, I would say that I would encourage you to go to the book signing a little bit later on and see how this technology works. Okay. All right, let me move forward. Sometimes though, as business owners, as communicators, we're incredibly hesitant to adapt with change or to adopt new technology, even new iconography. Why is this still the save button on our computers? I mean, this pisses me off, right? If you're Gen Z or Alpha generation, you've never seen one of this. When was the last time you used a floppy drive? We need to be iconoclastic as business owners to smash through and change the icons and the symbols that we use in our business moving forward, the kind of brands that we create. Let me give you one example about how mobile, as a result and as the next evolution of digital, can change small business owners' lives. This is Raj. Raj is a fisherman in Kerala, India, where I recently spent some time. And I was recently in New Delhi working with one of my clients, Z Media in India, talking about the likes of Raj, because what happened in this very traditional industry in India was that Raj and his mates, the only business productivity improvement that they would do as fishermen at the end of the day when they caught their fish and took it back to shore and into the marketplace where they sold their commodities, was that they would go back and they would mend the nets to make sure that some of the fish wouldn't get out of their nets. One day, though, Raj realized that he had enough money to buy a Nokia mobile phone. Do you remember Nokia? An 1100, the mobile phone that sold the most units out of any mobile phone in the world until today. He had enough money, and he thought about this mobile phone and the fact that Bharti Airtel, owned by Singtel, had coverage up to 22 kilometers away from the shoreline. And that he'd always just gone back to the same marketplace every day, because based on his gut feel and based on the location of his family, this was where he could get his cash the fastest, but not always at the best rate. He had the choice of 11 different harbours to go to, but he'd always go back to the same one, listening to his gut feel. He thought it was the best thing to do. But he had some mates in the 11 different harbours, and based on his geolocation, he could start giving those mates a call to see what the commodity price was in the 11 different harbours. Do you think the price was exactly the same? Absolutely not. All of a sudden, he started digitizing his rational mind to make smarter decisions about where he was going to do his business. And he started making different decisions based on real-time mobile data, or big data, as some of us like to call it. All of a sudden, his mates saw that Raj was making more money than them because he'd adopted the new technology and was making smarter decisions about his family business. The Economist and the Quarterly Journal of Economics got a hold of this story. They audited the process of what happened with mobile adoption in Kerala, India. And they saw that over the course of a year, the net profits of the fishermen went up 8%, and the price of the consumer went down 4% as a result of less wastage. Now, any economist right now should be having goosebumps. Yeah? This is what can happen when you adopt new mobile technology. It's an easy example also of what your customers are doing and the kind of pricing transparency and traceability that they're expecting from you guys, and where they're expecting you to play and to be providing them with essential information. Just like digital is extremely disruptive for my mum as a hitherto non-adaptive business owner, it's also the savior for her in the future. Because we're now collaborating and talking via free or nearly free digital platforms like Evernote, Viber, WhatsApp, Dropbox, Google Apps, and now, for the first time in history, she's using Retail Pro and has a deep insight into the big data analytics around her business, making sure that her inventory management, as we just heard about in terms of cash flow, is much better than it's ever been before. Because until a few years ago, she was still managing her inventory with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 shirts in this size. Digitization is the key to her future. Digitization is what drives the amplification of her beautiful analog story of this brand heritage and equity. But we're now amplifying it via Tumblr, Pinterest, Instagram, YouTube, and of course, MailChimp. How much is this costing? Not very much. But we must become less black and white, less thinking about analog and digital as mutually exclusive. In fact, what we must do is to realize that there is a Venn diagram at play here, where hearts and minds are not mutually exclusive, but in fact converging right now. And that adaptive business leaders truly get that there's a sweet spot in the middle, rife for innovation. I'm going to share some examples of those in just a moment. But what you need to be asking yourself as a small business owner is to be thinking about what brand touch points or even processes in your business must be digitized for a more effective, more productive future. But also ask yourself, are there any touch points with the clients, like a handwritten note that maybe must never be digitized? You must make a deliberate choice of the things you must digitize, should digitize, and also some pieces that should just remain fundamentally humane. At times, digital may seem a bit dehumanized, but in other regards, it also provides us huge human amplification and connectivity. As I said, my mum has sort of started this digital journey. And in line with that, it would be unethical of me not to offer you guys some digital resources. If you are following the Twitter stream here today, or if you're already following me on Twitter, Twitter handle Sorman-Nilsson, we do have some digital resources, including this presentation available for you for download. Of course, it's a great way in full transparency to capture email addresses for future communications. This is something you guys should always be doing. Hopefully I have permission of Cara to do this as well. Always ask permission afterwards. Okay. But as I said, my mum started embarking on this digital journey, and sometimes she sends me little YouTube clips to argue for the ways of old, because sometimes she finds that as a futurist, I get too carried away with the virtual cyber future of 2020, etc. So sometimes she reminds me of the value of brand equity and heritage and things that may never be able to be digitized. And I think this YouTube video says it particularly well.
Emma. Huh? Emma. 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 Emma.
Okay, clearly there's a great future, and I guess that there is some great takeaways and giveaways from Officeworks, our official sponsor here today, to argue for the great future that is paper as well. I should just say on that note that paper has a future. I should just say that one of our Christmas campaigns last year for my mum's shop, and yes, she is my toughest pro bono client, was to zig when everybody else zags. Now, who sends Christmas cards in the audience? Everybody should send great Christmas cards because nobody sends them anymore. And the research shows that people rather not get a greeting whatsoever than get an SMS or a Facebook message. But people at Christmas time, if you celebrate Christmas, love getting a handwritten Christmas card. So we had a 300% return on our investment in last year's Christmas direct mailing campaign. It was a huge innovation, incredibly thin like this. And we sent it via something called snail mail. Huge boost to our Christmas sales last year for Mum's company. So think about that for the future. That's a free giveaway to all of you. Final point here today. Yes, digital minds, but analog hearts. Key to remember in your business and how you connect, because digital doesn't fix all human communications. In fact, digital can stuff us up at times. If you've ever tried predictive texting, you'll know exactly what I'm referring to here. Digital can miscommunicate and set us back into the stone age of human communications. And some businesses, as they ponder the digital future as something scary potentially, they look to the likes of industries like entertainment, like music, who've essentially swapped what? Analog dollars for digital pennies. This is something we mustn't do. But at the same time, the digital world can seem a bit ephemeral, as a quick moment in time that's hard to remember and easy to forget. In fact, who remembers your first MP3 digital download? Anybody? Fantastic, probably criminal acts, but it's okay. Save it. On the contrary, who remembers your first vinyl record or the first tape you ever got given? A few more hands, right? Now, we might be demographically biased, but I still remember running around an entire summer in 1987 singing It's the Final Countdown by Europe. I didn't speak a single word of English at the time, so it sounded somewhat weird. Now, I really just share this particular slide because when my brother and I are out and about, people go, "Sing us that song." Now, my Scottish sucks, but easy to say if you're Swedish, but the Proclaimers were pretty cool. Okay. I should also add to this idea of digital versus analog that vinyl sales are up 20% year on year for the last few years, both in the USA and in America and in Australia. Why? Because something about vinyl is forever, whereas digital can be ephemeral. even though we have it digitally available to us via streaming devices like Spotify all of the time. Sometimes we just want that crispy sound of the vinyl. Now, there is an intergenerational gap here. I should just say that one of my colleagues who has Gen Y kids was recently cleaning out the house and the attic because she had to move out of the maternal home because the kids would never leave. The kids are like 29 and 30. So mama in the family was moving out. And they were cleaning out the attic, and my friend was making tea down in the kitchen, and all of a sudden one of her 29-year-old daughters comes running down the stairs and goes, with a vinyl, Mum, when were you a DJ? Just showcases how the format sometimes shifts, right? But let me give you a couple of examples why the analog world is so key to you as small business owners into the future. Because I get to steal great ideas or get inspired by great ideas from my Fortune 500 clients, and then like Robin Hood, I give them to my mum. Yeah? Google, digital or analog? It's a digital disruptor, right? But in a great marketing move recently, which we stole for our Christmas campaign last year, they did this. To argue that the future is all digital, what does Google do? They send us a printed voucher printed on Officeworks stationery, right? Via snail mail, telling us that the future is all digital. We're going to prove it by going direct mail. Just one example. Another example is these guys, Nike. Let's steal this idea for a moment. Nike used to just sell us physical hardware, but now they're also in software. Who uses Nike Plus or Nike Fuel Band? Yeah? They built a digital ecosystem where they found out that a user who might be running an ASIS shoes like I used to, after tuning in and getting engaged in the digital software platform, after 5 times, they're more likely to buy which kind of product? And because of these devices, they're able to send me little alerts saying, maybe it's time to buy a new pair of runners. Yeah, kind of freakish, right? But they know once I've walked 500 miles. You know, this is key, right? All right, that was a stupid pun, but I had to try it. Okay, my pharmaceutical clients, like this American pharmaceutical clients who are in men's health products, they realized that their old model, on the contrary, of just providing printed information and little tablets in little trial packs wasn't so effective with doctors anymore because they'd have 30 seconds. But when they started bringing their iPads and letting doctors start playing with the comparative effectiveness of this men's health product compared to this men's health product, to look at the stats and data, etc. And they actually gave this little toy that is the iPad that no one knew why they bought other than the fact that Steve Jobs told us we needed it. They're 12% more likely to prescribe that drug. Is that good for the pharmaceutical client? What can we learn about that when we give a presentation or when we sit down in a sales meeting? Maybe hand over the iPad with your presentation. Let the client play around with it, like some of our tailors are now starting to do. Finally, it would be unethical of me not to speak about IKEA as a Swede. One of their greatest branding assets is the IKEA catalog, something that they can never get rid of. I spoke to some of the leaders at IKEA recently at a conference in Portugal, and I asked them, you know, everyone's digitizing. When is this thing going to go digital? And they go, Anders, you don't understand. We have people that set their entire annual schedule by the arrival of the IKEA catalog. And I go, yes, this is part of the Swedish global conspiracy. Yeah? They call us up and complain if it comes a day late. We cannot get rid of the IKEA catalog, but what we've done this year is to turn the IKEA catalog digilog. And so now when you come home and you receive the coveted IKEA catalog, well, you can put it down on the floor, open it up to its page, and through augmented reality, if you have a really weird-looking Swedish family like this, Billy the bookcase will jump alive in your room to scale. You can move him or her or it around, change color, and interact in your own context through your digital devices, phablets, mobiles, etc. Fun for digital immigrants and digital natives. All of a sudden, this is relevant in your context. You no longer have to go through the labyrinth that is IKEA, suffering the threat of a divorce. Now you can do it all in your home. How wonderful. And of course, you can order things online, do weird bits like this, even have a PowerPoint or a Prezi presentation afterwards of how all the furniture would fit into your own personal psychometric segment of one. This connects both with digital minds but also with analog hearts. It truly is going digi-log. Sometimes the feedback hurts. But what's really relevant when we do our strategy planning, both with our Fortune 500 clients and also our SME clients, is that we work out what's the old stuff in business, some of which we might have forgotten, like Christmas cards, that maybe we need to reintroduce. What's the old stuff that really connects? But also, what are some of the new things we should be doing, both across the analog and the digital? And occasionally, what's the augmented reality that bridges the analog with the digital? That's where the battle for hearts and minds are truly won. IKEA makes sure that it doesn't throw away the analog baby with the digital bathwater. It combines both and the best of the analog and the digital to win hearts and minds. And whether you're a retailer or whether you're a small business, you need to be thinking about how you create places for the future. Yesterday I was working with a group of retailers that you'd all know here in Australia, and we talked about the fact that the new Burberry store in Regent Street in London is not just about creating a physical experience, but in fact they got inspired by Burberry.com and they wanted to bring the digital into the store. So when you go through the store, you have all the same experiences that you could through mobile. They have live streamed events. If you pick up a product and put it in front of a mirror, all of a sudden that particular product and the description comes alive for you. Yet in the process, Burberry loses none of its heritage, none of its tradition, none of its attention to detail, but that story, that brand story, is coveted, amplified, digitized, and in fact the humanity is enduring as a result of Burberry going omni-channel and going digilog. Now some of you might be thinking, okay, that's all very well and good, Anders, for big businesses like Burberry and IKEA. What do I do with a small budget? And I'll get to this as we start unwinding, or start winding up, I should say. Again, the OLI or the URL for some of you guys who want to download some of the presentation materials, you can on this particular URL. But the final three thoughts I want to offer before I give you some hope about how you can do this on a small budget is that you need to remember that because of digitization, every business is now in media. What does this mean? You need to publish, publish, publish engaging content digitally. And make sure that you do it optimally. When would you publish a blog on Airbnb or maybe on the budget? Well, probably when the budget's coming out, because people are actually reading about it, hashtagging it, and it's starting to trend. So make sure that you tune into things like Google Trends around some of the key topics that you guys are interested in. Make sure that whenever you publish something, that it's news aligned. And that when you prepare something once, you send it out across multiple channels. Prepare once, leverage. And make sure that when you tell stories that you do it through impactful and visualized storytelling online. Secondly, offer informational value to your clients and prospective clients, increasingly information-seeking digital minds. Do digital presentations via GoToWebinar, for example, or maybe do thought leader hangouts via Google Hangouts to showcase your expertise in a particular area. And thirdly, make sure that you connect experientially with analog hearts. How can you do that? Well, you could run educational events like Officeworks and SmartCompany are doing here today, which I think is a great showcase of that. You could offer VIP nights like we do in Mum's shop, for example. And sometimes it's as easy as just having a face-to-face luncheon. There's a great saying that you should never dine or lunch alone. Because sharing bread, breaking bread, having a glass of wine may just still be the most profound form of connecting and subtly inviting someone to buy something for you. Okay, I started this presentation talking a little bit about little Max Harpham, the really cool Aussie kid who's the top scorer for the Normo Eagles in Normanhurst in Sydney. Now, the digital technology is all well and good, but sometimes the batteries run out. And if it wasn't for the likes of the Shepherd Centre, who also teach Max and his family the virtues of lip reading for times when the batteries run out, who provide coaching and support and therapy for families that have just found out that their newborn child is profoundly deaf. If they didn't teach Max and his family how to calibrate the devices for various ecosystems, geolocations, football fields, or the rally track, the technology just wouldn't make sense. So it's key for you guys to remember that human beings are still central to business tomorrow. We mustn't fight the future, but we also must not throw away the analog baby with the digital bathwater. So whatever happened to my mum's little shop? Well, she's not out of the woods quite yet if I look at her P&L statement, which I've just been reminded to look at even more often. But I should just say that in a family business context, we need to conserve capital and make sure we get the biggest bang for our buck. So recently we recruited some students because they're cheap. And we thought about how can we do something that's akin to IKEA. So we digitized my dad. My dad's a retired colonel in the Swedish Army, which is a really good career move because we never go to war. Although he always reminds me that he's done his bit with NATO, both in Afghanistan and in Kosovo, so I should just add that. Dad, I'm on live stream, I know. And this is just Dad tying a simple four-in-hand tie knot. But what he's doing here is he's connecting both with analog hearts and digital minds, teaching something that's timeless in a timely manner. Now, the cool thing about this video is it got picked up by SvD Nyheter, our equivalent to the Australian or The Age, and then it got tweeted and Facebooked around the Digerati sphere in Sweden. And Mum, as a result, had out of her best months of sales in a decade as a result. That's kind of cool. And you didn't need IKEA's budget to do it. So here's Dad wrapping up this session, teaching us all how to do that timeless skill in a timely fashion. You don't need to speak Swedish to understand the gist of this.
Four-in-hand eller universalknuten. Det är faktiskt nästan perfekt för de här blir nästan bra.
And he's so proud there that he gets the balance between the two nearly perfectly even. And he goes, and son, and I did it on live television. So I sat down with Mum to talk about the analog and the digital and the fact that they don't have to be mutually exclusive. And finally, she kind of got it when she saw this campaign and other campaigns that we're now doing, where we're taking big data insights like knowing someone's first name, surname, their family history, and maybe their preferences for color, patterns and textures, things that she realizes are just human things that could be done much better in digital reality, where she can send a message via MailChimp to a segment of one in true tailoring style. And she realizes that the future is neither analog nor digital, but in fact, it's going digi-log. And I want to encourage all of you guys, as you think about the future, as you think about these waves of change going on around us today in the business world, as you think about the economic riptide that small to medium-sized businesses have been experiencing recently, and as you notice those waves of change around you, to not just think about digital as a disruption, but rather as an opportunity for you as an adaptive leader to start repositioning your brand, to connect both with digital minds but also with analog hearts, to think about how the digitization of everything might actually not just be a threat, but rather the opportunity for you to digitally amplify and safely get back to shore. And that in that process, that the battle for the hearts and minds of tomorrow's customers will be won by companies and brands who understand that they must connect both with digital minds and analog hearts by going truly digi-log. Thank you very much for hanging out.